Hollywood has always been the land of illusion, of curated images, polished reputations, and untouchable legends. But beneath the surface of the silver screen lies a web of secrets so shocking they were buried for decades. We're not talking about affairs or tax scandals. These are family secrets, hidden children, parental betrayals, generations of shame and silence. And for some stars, the truth only came out after they were gone. Today on Stage Whisper, we uncover 22 of the most jaw-dropping family secrets that Hollywood's golden lights tried to obscure. Let's begin. Lana Turner, a teenage star and the mother who stole her identity. Lana Turner wasn't just a movie star. She was a phenomenon. Her discovery at a soda fountain at HC Sound became Hollywood legend. But behind her overnight success was a mother who blurred the line between love and manipulation, and a family secret that shaped Lana's identity from the very start. Mildred Turner, Lana's mother, was fiercely ambitious. After Lana's father was murdered in a still unsolved robbery, Mildred packed them up and moved to Los Angeles. But what seemed like a fresh start quickly turned into something else. Mildred falsified Lana's birth certificate, shaved years off her age, and even pretended to be her sister for a brief time to attract better publicity deals. Lana's father, John Virgil Turner, was a bootleg gambler with possible mob connections. Facts the studios insisted never see the light of day. The official narrative became one of a small-town girl with big dreams. The truth? Her family history had been rewritten by her mother and then buried by MGM's publicity machine. As Lana's star rose, so did Mildred's control. She moved into every home Lana bought, oversaw her finances, interfered with her love life, and guilted her into submission by saying, "I gave you your fame." But that control came at a cost. Lana spiraled into turbulent marriages, scandalous headlines, including the infamous 1958 killing of her lover Johnny Stompanato, and lifelong guilt. Later in life, Lana admitted, "I think I became who she needed me to be, not who I really was." Beneath the glitz, Lana Turner was never truly free, not from her fame, and certainly not from her mother's shadow. Debbie Reynolds, a daughter's paternity that shocked Hollywood. Debbie Reynolds was America's sweetheart, a perfect blend of innocence, talent, and charm. But behind her radiant smile and cheery interviews, there was a secret that haunted her for decades: the question of her daughter's true father. When Debbie gave birth to Carrie Fisher in 1956, the world assumed the father was singer Eddie Fisher, her husband at the time and one half of the power couple that dominated fan magazines. But insiders at the time whispered that things weren't so simple. According to multiple biographers and studio insiders, Debbie had briefly separated from Eddie during a rocky point in their marriage, just months before Carrie was conceived. During that time, she allegedly grew close to a prominent studio executive, whose name has never been officially revealed, but was known to be a major influence on MGM's inner circle. When Carrie began to grow older, friends of the family noted how different she looked from her siblings, both in appearance and temperament. Even more shocking, one of Debbie's former confidantes claimed that Eddie himself had once questioned whether Carrie was biologically his. But Hollywood demanded a tidy narrative, and the matter was buried. Debbie never spoke of it publicly. Not once, but in Carrie Fisher's own memoir, Wishful Drinking, she jokingly referred to her family as a Hollywood illusion wrapped in a cocktail napkin. Was it just a joke? Or was it Carrie's coded way of saying the story the world believed wasn't entirely real? In Hollywood, sometimes the biggest secret isn't what you say, but what you never dare to confirm. 3. Tony Curtis, the brother he never spoke about. Tony Curtis dazzled the world in Some Like It Hot and Spartacus, living a life of fame, women, and Hollywood splendor. But few knew that his journey to stardom was shadowed by a secret buried in the streets of the Bronx. A brother he almost never mentioned, one who was hidden from the public for decades. Tony was born Bernard Schwartz to poor Hungarian Jewish immigrants. His childhood was harsh: poverty, anti-Semitism, abuse. But the deepest scar came from his younger brother Julius, who suffered from schizophrenia. At a time when mental illness was taboo, especially among immigrant families trying to make it, Julius was institutionalized at a young age and rarely spoken of again. Curtis, who had already changed his name and rebranded himself into the dashing movie star archetype, never publicly acknowledged his brother until much later in life. Even in his autobiographies, Julius was reduced to a fleeting mention. Insiders claimed that Tony carried a deep shame about his family's struggle with mental illness and feared that any public association with it could derail his career. The studios agreed and scrubbed any reference to Julius from publicity materials and profiles. But the guilt never left him. Friends described Tony as being haunted by the memory of his brother and tormented by the thought that he had essentially erased him to protect his own fame. Years later, in private, Tony reportedly confided, "I couldn't save him, and I didn't even try. I just ran." It was a truth he couldn't change, and a brother the world never really saw. Barbara Stanwyck, the son she pretended never existed. Barbara Stanwyck was one of the most respected actresses of the Golden Age, fiercely independent, emotionally powerful, and always in control. But the woman hailed as Hollywood's ultimate self-made star had a secret so deeply buried, even lifelong fans are shocked to learn it. She had a biological son she gave away and never publicly acknowledged. In 1926, before she became Stanwyck, a young Ruby Stevens gave birth to a child out of wedlock, a scandalous reality for a woman on the brink of show business. The father was never officially identified. Facing judgment, poverty, and the looming risk of being branded unfit, she gave the baby up for adoption shortly after birth. As Stanwyck's fame grew, so did the silence around her past. The child, Dion Anthony Fay, was later adopted by her and her then-husband, actor Frank Fay. But as her career skyrocketed and her marriage unraveled, her relationship with Dion disintegrated. By the time he was a teenager, she sent him away, permanently. Stanwyck never spoke of Dion again. In interviews, she dodged questions about motherhood. Her studio biography claimed she had no children. Publicly, she leaned into the image of a tough, independent woman who chose career over family. But Dion didn't disappear. In later years, he resurfaced and spoke briefly of the emotional abandonment he felt, being raised in wealth, but never with warmth. "She was never my mother," he said in a rare quote. "She was a stranger who didn't want me to exist." Even in death, Stanwyck left no mention of Dion in her will. No letter, no apology, just a legacy built on self-reliance and a silence that spoke louder than words. 5. Clark Gable, the secret daughter he never claimed. Clark Gable was the undisputed king of Hollywood, rugged, magnetic, and larger than life. To millions, he was Rhett Butler. To insiders, he was also a man fiercely protective of his image, and that included burying a secret that would only come to light after his death. He fathered a daughter and never acknowledged her. In the 1930s, Gable had a well-documented affair with his Call of the Wild co-star, the young and talented Loretta Young. But when she became pregnant, Loretta vanished from public view for over a year, claiming illness and then a European trip. The truth? She had given birth to a daughter, Judy Lewis, and then placed her in an orphanage, only to secretly adopt her later as a ward. Hollywood insiders whispered, but no one dared print the truth. Studios feared scandal. Loretta feared moral ruin in an era where unwed motherhood could destroy a career. And Gable? He never mentioned the child again. Judy grew up believing Loretta was her adoptive mother and had no idea who her father was, until her unmistakable ears, identical to Gable's, sparked questions. Still, it wasn't until adulthood that she finally learned the truth. Gable had died in 1960, having never acknowledged her, never seen her, never reached out. In her memoir Uncommon Knowledge, Judy wrote, "I spent years thinking I was unworthy. My father, the great Clark Gable, never wanted me." The Hollywood machine had buried the truth, but in doing so, it also buried a daughter's right to her own story. 6. Bette Davis, the daughter who publicly renounced her. Bette Davis built her career on playing strong, defiant women, and off-screen, she was no different. She was unapologetic, intense, and ferociously ambitious. But behind her Academy Awards and cutting one-liners lay a devastating family fracture. Her only biological daughter, B.D. Hyman, would later accuse her of emotional abuse and abandon her entirely. In the 1980s, just as Bette was entering the twilight of her life and battling breast cancer and a stroke, B.D. released a tell-all memoir titled My Mother's Keeper. It was a bombshell. In it, B.D. painted a picture of a tyrannical mother who manipulated, controlled, and psychologically tormented those closest to her. She described an upbringing dominated by mood swings, verbal cruelty, and a home where love was weaponized. The timing couldn't have been crueler. Bet had just been honored with Lifetime Achievement tributes and was depending on her daughter for care. The betrayal broke her. Bet responded not with interviews, but with silence. She cut BD out of her will and added this chilling clause: "I also leave my daughter Barbara Davis Sherry nothing for reasons known to her." Hollywood was stunned. Was BD bitter and opportunistic? Or was she revealing a painful truth about one of cinema's most revered icons? To this day, the family remains divided, and the feud never healed. In public, Bette Davis remained the firebrand. But in private, she lived out her final days betrayed by the one person she thought would never turn against her, her own blood. Sometimes, the sharpest cuts don't come from enemies. They come from your children's pens. 7. Rock Hudson, The False Marriage and the Man He Couldn't Name. To 1950s America, Rock Hudson was the embodiment of straight-laced romantic masculinity. Women swooned, men admired. But behind that sculpted jaw and soft charm was a secret that could have destroyed him in an instant. Rock Hudson was gay, and his entire family life was a studio-crafted illusion. Under contract with Universal, Hudson was ordered to maintain a spotless heterosexual image. That meant no rumors, no real relationships, and certainly no truth. So, in 1955, at the height of speculation, he married his agent's secretary, Phyllis Gates, a move widely believed to be orchestrated by the studio's publicity team to silence the press. The marriage lasted 3 years, and according to close friends, it was emotionally hollow. Privately, Hudson had romantic partners, men he cared deeply for, but none were ever publicly acknowledged. One former lover, who stayed anonymous for decades, described being forced to sneak out of back doors and never refer to Hudson by name in letters. Even after their divorce, Phyllis published her own memoir, painting herself as a naive woman shocked by Rock's sexuality. But others insisted she always knew and was complicit in the cover-up. Hudson's family life, as sold to the public, was entirely fabricated. No children, no lasting marriage, just a life of quiet denial, masked by a grin and a tuxedo. It wasn't until 1985, when he became the first major celebrity to die from AIDS, that the illusion shattered. And in his final act, he forced America to confront both a deadly epidemic and its own hypocrisy. Rock Hudson lived a lie to protect his career, but in dying, he told a truth the world could no longer ignore. Ingrid Bergman, the affair that made her a public enemy. Ingrid Bergman was once considered Hollywood royalty, graceful, intelligent, and as wholesome as they come. She was the luminous star of Casablanca, adored by fans and revered by critics. But in 1950, she became the center of one of the most explosive family scandals in cinema history. A pregnancy that shattered her public image and led the U.S. Senate to denounce her on the record. While still married to Swedish neurosurgeon Petter Lindström, Bergman began a torrid affair with Italian director Roberto Rossellini. Their affair began on set during Stromboli, and soon after, Ingrid became pregnant with Rossellini's child out of wedlock. The news stunned Hollywood. Studios scrambled, fan clubs dissolved, and the public, they turned on her with vicious intensity. She gave birth to a son, Roberto Ingmar Rossellini, in 1950, and then later had twin daughters with Rossellini. But the damage was done. Her marriage to Lindström imploded, and she was branded an apostle of degradation on the floor of the U.S. Senate by Senator Edwin Johnson. The scandal was so severe that Bergman went into exile in Europe for nearly a decade, shunned by the very country that once celebrated her. Her daughter Pia, from her first marriage, was quietly raised away from her mother during the scandal and reportedly carried emotional wounds over the abandonment. Though Bergman tried to reconcile with her American family later in life, the rift never fully healed. Hollywood loves a comeback story, and Bergman eventually returned, even winning an Oscar in 1956. But the stain of her scandal never fully vanished. Beneath the poise and perfection was a woman punished for following her heart, and a family divided by a single forbidden choice. Sammy Davis Jr., a hidden child and a deal with the studio. Sammy Davis Jr. broke barriers as one of the most electrifying performers of the 20th century. A trailblazing black entertainer who conquered stage, screen, and Vegas showrooms. But behind the spotlight, Davis made a decision early in his career that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He agreed to keep the existence of his daughter a secret in exchange for stardom. In the early 1950s, long before his controversial marriage to Swedish actress May Britt, Sammy had a brief affair with a black chorus girl during one of his stage tours. The relationship ended quickly, but not before the woman became pregnant. The girl gave birth to a daughter, Tracy, but Davis was warned by his handlers and the studio that acknowledging a child out of wedlock, especially with a black woman at a time when he was being packaged for crossover white audiences, could derail his entire career. So he made a deal. He would financially support the child, but publicly deny any relationship. For years, Tracy Davis lived with the knowledge that her father was a legend, but that he couldn't or wouldn't acknowledge her in front of the world. It wasn't until she reached adulthood that they began to reconcile. In her memoir, Sammy Davis Jr., My Father, Tracy revealed how painful it was to see her father play doting roles on TV while remaining emotionally distant in real life. I knew he loved me, she wrote, but he loved his career more. Hollywood didn't just demand sacrifice, it demanded silence. And sometimes it was a child who paid the price. 10. Vivien Lee, the daughter she left behind. Vivien Lee captivated the world as Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind, forever etched in cinematic history as the Southern belle with iron in her soul. But behind the glamour, Lee carried a lifelong secret that few fans ever knew. She had a daughter, one she rarely saw, barely mentioned, and ultimately left behind. Before she was Vivien Lee, she was Vivian Mary Hartley, a young Englishwoman married to barrister Lee Holman. In 1933, at just 19 years old, she gave birth to her only child, Suzanne. But motherhood quickly clashed with ambition. Vivien was consumed with becoming a star, and within a few short years, she left her husband and daughter to pursue acting in London full-time. When she met and married Laurence Olivier, Suzanne was sent to boarding school and raised primarily by her father. Lee, increasingly absorbed by her demanding career and later plagued by bipolar disorder and tuberculosis, kept her daughter at a distance. Their contact was sporadic, often mediated through letters or brief visits. Hollywood knew Vivien as intense, luminous, and emotionally fragile, but few knew she had a child, let alone the deep estrangement that followed. Suzanne rarely appeared at public events with her mother and was noticeably absent from Lee's interviews and press features. After Vivien's death in 1967, Suzanne inherited part of her estate, but the emotional distance remained. In later interviews, Suzanne spoke with restrained affection, noting that she was a remarkable woman, but not really a mother. Vivien Lee gave the world an unforgettable performance, but off-screen, the role of mother was one she never fully embraced. Charlie Chaplin, the paternity case that scandalized a nation. Charlie Chaplin was more than a silent film icon. He was one of the most powerful men in Hollywood, but his personal life was anything but silent. In 1943, he became embroiled in a scandal that nearly destroyed his career and revealed a family secret so explosive it landed him in court and in the crosshairs of the FBI. Joan Barry, a 22-year-old aspiring actress, claimed Chaplin was the father of her unborn child. The affair, which Chaplin admitted to, had already ended by the time she announced her pregnancy. He denied paternity, but Barry filed a lawsuit, and the story hit front pages across America. The court-ordered blood test proved Chaplin was not the biological father. But in a shocking move, the judge refused to allow the results into evidence. The jury, swayed by the tide of moral outrage, ruled against him. Chaplin was forced to pay child support for a child who was biologically not his. The damage was immense. His name became synonymous with scandal. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, already suspicious of Chaplin's political views and status as a British citizen, used the case as ammunition to smear him. Public opinion turned. The U.S. government revoked his re-entry permit during a trip abroad, effectively exiling him from America. Behind it all was a child caught in a bitter war of reputation, morality, and politics. Chaplin eventually had 8 children with his 4th wife, Una O'Neill, but he never publicly discussed the Barry case again. A comedy legend brought low by a secret the courts refused to bury, and a daughter he insisted was never his, but had to claim anyway. Grace Kelly, the hidden lover and the love child rumor. Grace Kelly lived the ultimate fairy tale. From Hollywood royalty to real-life Princess of Monaco, she embodied elegance, restraint, and glamour. But long before she wore a crown, Grace was rumored to have left behind a secret so controversial it was erased from the official narrative, a child conceived during a forbidden affair. Before meeting Prince Rainier, Grace had a passionate relationship with fashion designer Oleg Cassini. The two were inseparable, and Cassini later claimed they had been secretly engaged. But when Grace's career exploded and the monarchy came calling, everything changed. Cassini later alleged that Grace had become pregnant during their time together. According to biographers, the pregnancy was quietly terminated, or the child given up in secret, with the full cooperation of MGM and Grace's family, both of whom feared scandal and the loss of her virginal image. There are conflicting reports. Some insiders claim a child was born in Europe and adopted discreetly. Others insist the pregnancy ended before term. Grace herself never confirmed or denied the rumors, but those closest to her say the regret lingered for the rest of her life. When she married Prince Rainier in 1956, the palace demanded a clean slate. Grace abandoned her film career and took on a new identity, one that left no room for past indiscretions. Even her children were shielded from much of her former life. What makes Grace's story haunting isn't just the mystery, it's the silence. A woman trapped between two identities, the Hollywood star with a heart full of passion and the royal figure required to be pristine. And somewhere in between, perhaps, a child lost to history. 13. James Dean, the father he never spoke about. James Dean, the rebel without a cause, became a symbol of misunderstood youth and tragic potential. But beneath the brooding charm and cinematic legacy lay a family secret few fans ever knew. James Dean was virtually abandoned by his father, and he never forgave him. Dean's mother, Mildred, died of cancer when he was just 9 years old. The loss devastated him. But what came next cut even deeper. His father, Wynton Dean, unable or unwilling to raise him alone, sent young James away to live with relatives on a farm in Fairmount, Indiana. For years, James asked why, wrote letters, longed for contact. But his father all but disappeared from his life. When Dean later moved to Los Angeles to pursue acting, Wynton resurfaced briefly, but by then, the damage was done. Their conversations were stiff, strained, and distant. Dean rarely spoke of his father publicly. When he did, it was laced with cold detachment. Friends noted that Wynton's absence and the feeling of being discarded fueled much of James's inner turmoil and his now legendary emotional volatility. In private journals, Dean wrote cryptic references to abandonment and betrayal, often describing the man who gave me blood but never love. During therapy sessions in New York, he confessed to struggling with rage and confusion over his father's rejection. Tragically, they never reconciled. James Dean died in a car crash at 24, his meteoric rise cut short. At the funeral, Wynton stood in the back row, weeping quietly, surrounded by strangers who knew his son better than he ever had. Sometimes, the biggest family secret isn't about what's hidden, but who chose to walk away. Merl Oberon, the mother she pretended was her maid. Merl Oberon, the luminous star of Wuthering Heights, was a vision of aristocratic beauty. But the truth behind her porcelain complexion and refined accent was far more complicated and heartbreakingly concealed. For most of her life, Merl Oberon hid her true heritage and pretended her mother was her maid. Born in British-ruled India in 1911, Merl was actually of mixed Anglo-Indian descent, a fact that could have ended her career before it began. In colonial society and racist early Hollywood circles, such a background was considered scandalous. So when Merl moved to England in pursuit of acting, she reinvented herself. She claimed she was born in Tasmania to British parents. In truth, her mother was a dark-skinned woman named Charlotte Selby, and her biological father was likely a British railway engineer. To maintain the illusion, Merl introduced Charlotte as her maid when she accompanied her to Europe, a role her mother heartbreakingly accepted. The lie wasn't just for the public. Even close friends and romantic partners were kept in the dark. She wore makeup to lighten her skin and avoided sunlight to prevent tanning. Studio biographies were doctored. Her entire identity, down to her birthplace, was fabricated. Merl's brother tried to expose the truth in later years, but she denied it until her death in 1979. Only after her passing did researchers and biographers begin to piece together the real story. The cost of fame? A mother forced into servitude and a heritage denied in the name of success. Merl Oberon conquered Hollywood, but it was a victory built on the erasure of her own bloodline. Walter Matthau, the brother he never wanted the world to know. Walter Matthau was known for his craggy face, razor wit, and lovable curmudgeon persona in classics like The Odd Couple and Grumpy Old Men. But off-screen, there was a chapter of his life he never joked about, a mentally ill brother he kept hidden from the public, even as his fame soared. Born Walter Matushansky to poor Jewish immigrants in New York City, Matthau grew up during the Depression, crammed into tenement housing with his family. But one member of that family, the older brother Henry, suffered from severe mental illness, reportedly schizophrenia. At a time when resources for mental health were non-existent and the stigma was brutal, Henry was institutionalized as a young man and rarely mentioned again. As Matthau's career flourished, he quietly removed traces of his brother from public biographies and interviews. He often spoke fondly of his mother and upbringing, but carefully avoided any discussion of siblings. Even in deep-profile magazine features, Henry's name never surfaced. Those close to Matthau said the silence wasn't born of cruelty, but of shame. He feared that revealing the full truth about his family background would distract from his work or invite ridicule. It was the era of carefully curated personas, and Matthau's image was already an uphill climb against the leading man standard. In private, he reportedly supported Henry's care until the end. But in public, he kept the door tightly shut. It wasn't until after Matthau's death in 2000 that archival interviews and personal letters confirmed the existence of his brother, and the quiet sorrow he carried for never acknowledging him. Fame demanded laughter. But behind the smile, Walter Matthau bore the weight of a brother the world never saw. Ava Gardner, the secret abortion she took to her grave. Ava Gardner was the ultimate Hollywood siren, fierce, magnetic, and untamed. Men chased her, the press idolized her, and studios banked on her sensual mystique. But hidden behind that smoky-eyed glamour was a painful secret. She had an abortion during her marriage to Frank Sinatra, and she never spoke of it publicly, not even once. Their relationship was the stuff of tabloid legend, volatile, passionate, and scandalous. When Gardner married Sinatra in 1951, the backlash was ferocious. He had just left his wife, Nancy, and the Catholic Church disapproved. The press hounded them relentlessly. Studio executives warned that any misstep could ruin both of their careers. Then came the pregnancy. According to Ava's private letters, only revealed years after her death, she became pregnant with Sinatra's child in the early 1950s. But with Sinatra's career on the rocks and her own star just rising, she made a decision under enormous pressure. She quietly flew to London and terminated the pregnancy. The studios arranged the doctor. The press never found out. Sinatra was devastated, but Ava was resolute. "We couldn't even take care of ourselves," she later wrote in a letter to a friend. "Bringing a baby into that madness would have destroyed us both." She never had children. Some say it was her choice. Others claim the procedure left her unable to conceive. But Ava never revealed the full truth. For all her defiance, for all her fame, there was a grief she never confronted publicly. A chapter she ripped out of her own story. Ava Gardner was the woman every man wanted, and the mother she might have been remained a shadow in the silence. 17. George Reeves, a mysterious death and the family that went silent. George Reeves soared to fame as Superman in the 1950s, becoming a symbol of truth, justice, and the American way. But off-screen, Reeves's life was marked by loneliness, career disappointment, and a sudden suspicious death that left his family in silence and the public asking, what really happened the night Superman died? In June 1959, Reeves was found dead in his bedroom with a gunshot wound to the head. The official ruling was suicide. But those who knew him, and even members of his own family, never fully accepted the explanation. Why? There were no fingerprints on the gun. His fiancée, Leonore Lemon, and several guests were downstairs at the time of the shot, but conflicting accounts muddied the timeline. Reeves had been involved in a long affair with Toni Mannix, the wife of powerful MGM executive Eddie Mannix, a man with known connections to organized crime. That relationship had ended bitterly just months earlier. Reeves' mother, Helen Besselow, outright rejected the suicide claim. She hired private investigators, pushed for a second autopsy, and reportedly told friends, "My son didn't kill himself. He was silenced." But after a few months, the case was quietly closed. No charges, no answers, and Helen, she never spoke publicly again. The pain and mystery consumed the family from the inside. In Hollywood, stories are rewritten, but Reeves' legacy wasn't revised. It was buried. His death became a punchline, his tragedy, tabloid fodder. The family, silenced by grief and fear, retreated into obscurity. Behind the cape and the smile was a man destroyed by secrets, and a family left without justice. Sal Mineo, A Love Life, his family refused to acknowledge. Sal Mineo was the heart-wrenching Plato in Rebel Without a Cause, a performance so emotionally raw that it earned him an Oscar nomination at just 17. But while Hollywood adored his sensitivity on screen, his real-life identity as a gay man was erased, rejected, and denied, most painfully by his own family. In 1950s America, being openly gay was career suicide, especially for teen idols. So Mineo stayed closeted, playing along with studio-arranged romances and dodging tabloid speculation. But in private, he lived a different truth, one filled with secret relationships, discreet lovers, and a growing need to live authentically. By the early 1970s, his career had cooled, but Mineo had begun to take bolder steps toward openness. He directed gay-themed theater, gave interviews hinting at his sexual orientation, and confided in close friends about his longtime partner, actor Courtney Burr III. But his family, especially his deeply religious mother, refused to acknowledge it. After Mineo was murdered in a robbery in 1976, news of his sexuality trickled out through tabloids and insider reports. Yet, during funeral arrangements and memorial services, his partner was sidelined, excluded from family decisions, and treated as invisible. His mother reportedly insisted that those rumors be shut down and that the public remember her son as he appeared on the silver screen. To this day, some official biographies still avoid discussing his personal life. Sal Mineo broke hearts in Rebel Without a Cause, but in the end, it was his own heart and identity that were denied by those closest to him. He died longing for truth. His family chose silence. 19. Dorothy Dandridge, the daughter the studio tried to hide. Dorothy Dandridge was the first Black woman nominated for a Best Actress Oscar, a dazzling pioneer who broke barriers and paid dearly for it. But few knew that while she smiled on red carpets and made history on screen, she was hiding a family secret the studio worked hard to keep out of the spotlight. A severely disabled daughter she quietly placed in institutional care. In 1943, Dandridge gave birth to a daughter, Harolyn Suzanne Nicholas, during her marriage to dancer Harold Nicholas. The child was born with brain damage due to lack of oxygen during birth. Doctors later diagnosed her with cerebral anoxia, leaving her developmentally disabled for life. As Dorothy's fame grew, the pressures mounted. Studio contracts, touring schedules, racial politics. There was no room for a child who needed full-time care. MGM executives, obsessed with image, reportedly advised her to keep the girl out of sight. Under that weight, and with limited support, Dorothy eventually made the heart-wrenching decision to place Harolyn in a state institution. She continued to visit and financially support her daughter for years, but the emotional toll was immense. Dandridge rarely spoke of Harolyn publicly. In interviews, she pretended to be childless. Even friends were unaware of her daughter's existence until long after her death. Tragically, Harolyn outlived her mother, who died at just 42 under mysterious circumstances, possibly suicide, possibly accidental overdose. In private, Dandridge was tormented by guilt. In public, she was forced to choose between motherhood and survival in a racist, unforgiving system. Hollywood crowned her a trailblazer, but it demanded a silence so profound it erased her child from history. Peter Lofford, the Kennedy secret that haunted his marriage. Peter Lofford was the suave British-American actor best known as a member of the Rat Pack, and more notably, as the brother-in-law to President John F. Kennedy. But beneath his polished charm lay a secret that tore apart his personal life and turned his marriage into a battlefield. He became the unwilling gatekeeper to one of the darkest Kennedy family secrets, their connection to Marilyn Monroe. Lofford married Patricia Kennedy, sister to JFK and Robert Kennedy, in 1954. Their union was as much political as it was romantic. It elevated Lofford's Hollywood profile, and the Kennedy family gained a direct link to Tinseltown power. But when Marilyn Monroe entered the picture, everything began to unravel. Lofford was the man who introduced Monroe to the Kennedy brothers. His Santa Monica beach house became the infamous location for their private encounters, first with JFK, later with Bobby. He arranged the meetings, he made the calls, and eventually he became trapped in the crossfire. When Monroe died in 1962 under suspicious circumstances, Lofford reportedly panicked. He was allegedly instructed to destroy phone records, clean up the house, and forget everything he had seen. Patricia, already resentful of his drinking and womanizing, was horrified by his involvement. Their marriage collapsed soon after. In private, Lofford fell into depression and addiction. He was shunned by the Kennedys and mocked by his Rat Pack peers. In later years, he confided to close friends that he was haunted by what he knew and what he helped cover up. By the time he died in 1984, he was broke, blacklisted, and estranged from the family he had once married into. Peter Lofford carried the Kennedy family's dirtiest secret to his grave and lost his own in the process. Carole Lombard, the brother who vanished from her story. Carole Lombard was Hollywood's queen of screwball comedy, irreverent, witty, and unforgettably glamorous. Her love story with Clark Gable became the stuff of legend. But long before she met Gable, before the fame and the furs, Lombard had a brother who mysteriously vanished from her life and from the official record. Born Jane Alice Peters in Fort Wayne, Indiana, Lombard was the youngest of 3 children. Her older brothers, Frederick and Stuart, were part of her early life, but only one of them, Frederick, would remain publicly acknowledged after she hit stardom. Stuart, the middle child, suffered from mental illness, possibly undiagnosed schizophrenia, and began to exhibit erratic behavior as a teenager. He was quietly sent to a private facility in California in the early 1920s. At the same time, Carole was being groomed by studios to become the ideal all-American starlet. From that point forward, Stuart disappeared from interviews, biographies, and studio press kits. Public records confirmed his institutionalization, but Lombard never acknowledged him again in any personal letters or press interviews. Biographers later noted that she would become visibly uncomfortable when asked about her family beyond her mother and Frederick. Was it studio pressure, personal trauma, or shame rooted in the era's brutal stigmas? Whatever the reason, Stuart Peters became a ghost in Lombard's story, one carefully edited out as her legend grew. When Lombard died tragically in a 1942 plane crash at the height of her fame, no mention was made of Stuart in her obituary. His existence had been erased, yet he outlived her by over a decade, reportedly still institutionalized and alone. Even in death, Carole Lombard's family secret remained locked behind the closed doors of Hollywood's image machine. Fred Astaire, the sister he silenced. Fred Astaire was elegance in motion, graceful, debonair, and seemingly untouched by scandal. He was the face of classic Hollywood musicals, a perfectionist who defined sophistication on the dance floor. But hidden behind that polished poise was a secret many fans never knew. Astaire had a sister, Adele Estair, who was once more famous than he was, and whose abrupt exit from show business left wounds that were never truly healed. Adele Estair was Fred's original dance partner. As a duo, the Astairs dominated Broadway and vaudeville in the 1910s and 1920s. Adele was dazzling, charismatic, witty, and widely considered the real star of the two. But in 1932, at the height of their success, she shocked the world by quitting the stage to marry British aristocrat Lord Charles Cavendish. The decision devastated Fred. He never publicly criticized her, but in private, he was gutted. Biographers suggest that Adele's departure forced Fred to reinvent himself and ultimately led to his Hollywood ascent. But the cost was personal. He barely spoke of her in interviews. When asked about their early career, he often minimized her role, framing himself as the driving creative force. The family dynamic became strained. Adele's marriage turned tragic, plagued by alcoholism, miscarriages, and depression. She reportedly asked Fred for help multiple times, both emotionally and financially, but he kept his distance, maintaining the polished image that defined his public persona. Adele eventually faded into obscurity, her groundbreaking work largely overshadowed by her brother's solo success. Fred Astaire danced into immortality, but to do so he left his sister, his first partner, his artistic equal, behind in silence. It was a decision he never discussed, and a family fracture he never tried to mend.